go ahead and get started. Looks like most people have joined. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pam Watts. I'm the Executive Director of NIRSA, the Association for Campus Recreation. And Jenny Whittington, I think I also saw on the call, the Executive Director for URMIA. Thank you, Jenny, for putting this webinar together with us. We both reached out to our colleagues at Elon, who are going to present some information about risk management in this global pandemic, how they're approaching things at Elon, how campus recreation and the risk management department are working together. So this session will be recorded today. The chat will also record along with the video. If you use the private message feature of the chat, that doesn't save with the recording. So if you happen to one-off a friend or a colleague or me as facilitator, that won't save. Please do use the chat to share your thoughts, your ideas, your questions. I'm going to turn it over to our good friends at Elon in just a minute. They've prepared some opening remarks and some perspective on how they're approaching things at Elon, and then we'll open it up for questions. This is roundtable format, so we really do encourage you to ask a lot of questions, share your ideas. If you want to jump in and respond to a question, feel free to do that in the chat. If a particular question needs some clarity, or maybe we see a great idea being shared in the chat, I may call on you to share something about that verbally, so it also is in the recording. So thank you everyone for joining today and taking part in this NIRSA and URMIA roundtable. So Larry, I'm going to throw it over to you for an introduction, and then Megan, and then we'll pass it to Chris for an introduction and to start the presentation. So Larry?
Hi everyone, my name is Larry Mellinger. I'm the Director of Campus Recreation and Wellness at Elon University. I've been at Elon for about 5 years and a NIRSA member for close to 20. So excited to hear all of your great ideas around risk management today. Great.
And Megan?
Hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm Meghan Fisher. I'm the Assistant Director of Administrative Services at Elon. I'm actually starting my 10th year as a staff member this fall, which blows my mind a little bit. But I've been an URMIA member for about 5 years, so I'm excited to be on and talk to you all about our connection between risk management and campus rec.
Fantastic. And Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris Fulkerson. I'm Assistant Vice President for Administrative Services, and I've been at Elon for 38 years. I've been in a variety of roles. The most recent, I'm overseeing risk management and some auxiliaries. And I wanted to start out by talking more strategic, what risk management is. One thing we talk about is not all risk are bad. Some are good risk. For example, study abroad at most of our institutions. That's a good risk. Now you want to manage it carefully, but it's a good risk. Our students gain a lot of benefit from that. Risk management is really a systematic and honest look at programs, events, and opportunities. You want to name and define what the risk or opportunity is, and decide whether you're going to accept the risk, mitigate the risk, or eliminate the risk. And I wanted to share a heat map. Let's make sure I do that. And it's not coming up. Pam, can you share that?
I can. I'll take care of that.
It's not coming up for me.
Sure, no problem. Let's see. Might not be quite as pretty as yours, but we'll get it up here. All right.
Anyhow, what I'm sharing is a typical heat map. I'm sure you've seen heat maps before. One side is the likelihood of it happening, and the other axis is consequences. And I filled in part of the definitions. For example, is it almost certain to happen or not very likely? Is it a minor problem, or is business survival at risk? And I put numbers in there because a lot of times when I talk to departments, For example, the physical plant, the person I talk with will say, oh, that boiler is about to go out and that's $100,000 risk. So that's an extreme risk. Well, not for the institution, maybe for that department it is. So those numbers help to put some subjectivity or objectivity to it. And then they often ask about what's the likelihood. And so I put percentages. It's almost certain, 81 to 100% happening and so on. And that's helpful to make it a little more subjective. Okay, thank you. We can go back now.
Sure.
And many people tend to focus on the low risk, and you don't really need to spend a lot of time on those low risk. They'll be taken care of with your daily operations. You really should be taking care, really focus on the medium, high, and very high risk. In risk management, we try to influence the culture while working within the culture. We don't try to change it or mandate it. We try working with our partners across campus. Risk management is everyone's shared responsibility. The risk manager can't do it alone for an entire institution. It takes everybody. So it's really important to develop those partnerships, and Meghan has developed a great partnership with our campus rec folks. And both Meghan and I approach the risk management as being advisors. You're the experts in your field. We know what the institution will accept for a risk, and we know what our insurance company will accept for a risk. We also have access to a whole network of professionals through URMIA and through our broker, and we have access to a lot of materials that we often share with our colleagues across campus. Meghan, you want to take over?
Sure, thanks. So as Chris mentioned, one of my roles within risk management at Elon is to be the liaison between the risk management office and campus recreation. So for the URMIA folks who are on the call who may have attended the Eastern Regional Conference either last year or this year, you may have heard from Evan Small and I, who works with Larry. He's the Assistant Director of Campus Rec. And he and I work together pretty closely, just looking at policies, at procedures. We try and be not the fun police and say, no, you can't do this, but what are other ways that we can look at accomplishing your goals so that it meets risk management priorities while also being something that the students actually want to participate in, that you can have an experience during your time at Elon and get to do something cool, but do it in a safe and fun way. So Chris mentioned risk appetite, and I think that's really one thing that institutions need to look at, either in a COVID-19 situation or just operationally, is to look at what your risk appetite is. How much are you willing to take on? If you have a pool on your campus, in your facility, you know that things happen in pools, so you put lifeguards up, you put signs up, there's hours of operations. That is a managed risk. And there are three kind of risks that can be managed and specific to campus recreation. So there would be the known knowns, which is knowledge. You have sports, so you put refs on the field. You have EMS available. You have safety gear. You have training. You know that you are participating and allowing your students to participate in specific kinds of experiences, sports, whatever. So you have plans in place to mitigate potential risks at that point. There are the unknown unknowns. So you have an idea, something could happen, but you don't know what the severity of that risk can be. It's kind of like, you know that rain is coming. You don't know if it's going to be a quick, light rain or if it's going to be a thunderstorm. And just weighing that risk. Which side do we want? Do we want to err to the lighter rain side and hope that our policies and procedures will work? Do we plan for the thunderstorm? That's where the rules, the regulations, the procedures come into play when you have folks who are participating and saying, these are the expectations of you so that we can manage and mitigate potential risks down the road that we just don't know are down the road. And then there are the unknown unknowns, which nobody knows. And that's what the plans are for. You have plan A to Z. Some folks like to start at plan Z and work backwards to say, what is the worst possible risk that could possibly happen? And then we go to plan A. But just knowing that there are things that are going to be out of your control, campus recreation wise, otherwise, facility management, whatever it may be, having that acknowledgement saying, we know that we can't do this. So here's what we have in plans for if this should happen. And then being able to be nimble and move back and forth between if we need to start with plan C and then jump to plan F, depending on severity, or kind of work through the ABC, the plans there. And so that's where Larry's team comes in with actually enacting and doing the training, creating policies and procedures, and then we'll come back and say, does this meet our risk appetite? Where's the liability? How does this fit in with our insurance? And really just having open lines of communication and collaborating back and forth, again, to create that experience that the student actually wants to have. So Larry, if you want to pick up and talk about what you all are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Meghan Increased. The relationship between a risk management office and a recreation department is so critical for us to be able to operate on a daily basis, right? We're managing large facilities, often in different parts of campus, developing programs that occur on and off campus that have a variety of different risks associated with them. Often we're one of the largest, if not the largest employer on campus when you take our professional staff and student employees together. And then a lot of us have smaller risks that we're dealing with every day, such as records retention, asset management. But to me, and where our risk management department has really played a critical role in ensuring the safety and well-being of our students, as well as that we're making effective decisions is in the area of travel. Outdoor trips and club sports, so always talk with my team about this idea that no matter what we do throughout the course of the year, the riskiest thing that we're doing is putting students in vehicles and sending them off of our campus. That's why that relationship with your risk management office is so critical. Certainly, directors should have that relationship, but even at the program level, encourage you to foster those relationships. 5 years ago when I got to Elon, we had a very decentralized model for how we approached risk, and the pro to that was that many members of our teams had this really great relationship with the risk management office. But as we've grown, both in size and scope and breadth of our programs, we have started to centralize some of those processes because consistency has started to become one of those main topics that we want to ensure that we have. So we have risk management at a department level in one person's job description now, but we talk consistently about the fact that it does appear in everyone's role, and we all play a part in making sure that we're operating safe programs. But that's one of those things that how you structurally set up how your annual processes are taking place, right? Where your regular review schedules are happening in your facilities, your programs, your staff handbooks, your EAPs, your liability waivers. Are we trusting everyone within our departments to do those on your own schedule? Do you have deadlines that come throughout the year? Or do you have this singular clearinghouse in your department that helps to navigate some of those? At the program level, our staff, what is our staff expertise and credentialing? Again, as we dip into different waters, the outdoors area becoming larger, a lot of us getting into peer education and health and wellness education. That is a different level of risk than we've dealt with in the last several years for many of us. And then finally, as it trickles down to our student employees, right? What certifications do we offer? What training and ongoing education do we provide? And because they often oversee a significant percentage of what we do on a day-to-day basis, right? Here at Elon, we have 9 professionals, 2 grad assistants, and 280 student employees. So we're putting a lot on those student employees every day. So making sure that there is this concerted effort from the operational side of it with our student employees all the way up through the program development level, through the director's office, and then onto your risk management office. to be able to put some good practices in place and have these great relationships to ensure that we're able to do what we need to do. And right now, right, it's May 2020. You can't talk about risk management without thinking about COVID-19, and we're all thinking about reopening and right here in the immediate future with the summer, but also as we look forward to the fall. You know, our industry is under a lot of scrutiny as our country begins to reopen, and we're thinking about resuming operations, higher education in general, but certainly the fitness and recreation industry as part of that. You know, we're all asking the same questions. What policies are the right ones? How do we ensure people stay physically distanced in our spaces? What do we do with sports? What do we do with travel? Should we open at all? And if we should, can we afford to do it? So that's really where I'm going to turn it over to Pam, because I think you all maybe signed up for this webinar hoping for answers, but no, we were just here to throw out some questions and get a little dialogue for the next several minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you. That was great opening. We've got a couple questions here, and I've got a couple questions as well. So let's start with a couple specifics. So from Wendy, are you all considering adjusting the language in your waivers, in your participant waivers? Yeah, what does that look like for you, Larry?
Right now, the most significant one that we're looking at is we have a first-year summer experience. It's an outdoor wilderness experience, about 140 students over the course of 3 weeks going off to various places in North Carolina. And with that, we are working with Chris and Meg to pilot some language that we're going to consider for the summer. And whenever I talk about the summer, pilot or prototype is going to be a word that I use a lot, because we have this opportunity to look at the next couple months as to develop our own best practices. I think that's what makes this situation truly unique, is that we can't look back on something similar that happened 5, 10 years ago or ever. So we're going to have to create our own best practices. So the short answer to that, Wendy, is yes, we are looking at that, but we're looking at that through a lens of what will it change, and how will it either help or not help our ability to mitigate or eliminate some of those risks that are involved in those programs.
And Chris, you mentioned you know, industry partners and the information you get out of the insurance world. Is the insurance world giving any indications yet on where they might be going with coverage or new exclusions, or how they're thinking about this pandemic?
Yeah, they start out by saying they don't cover it.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I think we'll see some lawsuits come up and settle that question. They have given guidance on different things about, for example, reopening and liability around the workforce, and liability around students. So it depends on who your insurance company is. United Educators, many of us have, has given out different information about opening and what's safe and what we should be thinking about. There were a couple of roundtables on that.
We have another question about, is there any typical recreation programming that's just off the table right now? It's just not going to happen for the next, let's say, until we have a vaccine, I guess, if I had to pick up a time frame. Larry or Megan, anything you pulled off the table?
Not completely at this point, right? I think, you know, from that perspective, sports seems to be the one that is going to be the most challenging to do and do well. But, you know, right now, especially with sports, I think we're in such there's this trickle down effect that's happening, right? As the NCAA starts to put things out, that moves into how we might operate club sports, which moves into how we might operate intramurals, which then moves into how we might operate our open and drop-in recreation spaces. So, you know, we're trying to be, what I appreciate about Elon is that we tend to not make that big decision to pull things right out of the gates. You know, there might be, as Megan talked about, plans A through Z, but if plan B is to completely eliminate, it's going to be, we're going to work through a lot of contingencies before we bump it that high on the list. So as of right now, no, there's going to be ones that are incredibly challenging, that have to take a lot of creativity to be able to manage well. But, you know, if we think back on over the last couple of months, what our industry was able to do around the country with 1 to 2 weeks of notice about this, you know, I think if we, again, continue to take opportunities to pilot, look at best practices from our risk managers, from other places that are doing similar kind of work, I'm confident that we're going to be able to do a lot of the things safely that we'd like to.
Yeah. Megan, did you want to
in-
add to that? Or Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, we're located in North Carolina, and of course we follow the CDC guidelines, but the state has put into effect several executive orders, and we were expecting to open outdoor pools because that we had heard that was going to be allowed, and then all of a sudden that was off the table. So you have to have your plan, but be really flexible right now, because we're all trying to figure it out. We don't all have the answers.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Chris, about paying attention not only to the national guidance, but the local guidance. I think one of the things that struck me early on in the pandemic was how differently this unfolded across the country. And now I think we're seeing a whole range of how people, different areas of the country are trying to reopen. And we're all, of course, watching how those different strategies go to see if they're ultimately successful or not. Megan, I want to pick up on something you said. You talked about, you know, you have plan A, plan B, plan C, and you kind of move through those. And one of the things I think we're all aware of is, while there might be this immediate focus on reopening, a lot of campuses are talking about hybrid models. And if we do see spikes in hotspots and outbreaks, we may be in a, you know, open, close, open, close, open, close kind of waves and scenarios. And so maybe from a risk management perspective, you know, you think about different levels of risk and mitigating risk, and you know, Chris, I loved your chart. You know, I imagine situations move around that chart to some extent. So how are you thinking about this more long term, and as we might move through a variety of scenarios back and forth?
Yeah, I think for long term, it's definitely something that we just have to be flexible with and go with the flow. The last thing that we want to do is create a barrier to participation for students. For higher ed institutions, that's one thing that we want. That's why Campus Rec exists. We want our students to participate in this. So while it may look different from how it has looked in the past, the last thing that we want is to make this plan moving forward of, well, now we have to do it this way forever. You know, for project management, for phase gates that you go through, and you have to meet certain criteria before you move into the next phase. So depending on, like Chris said, we're in North Carolina, so we just entered phase 2. Depending on what phase 3 looks like, if we potentially enter that in the end of June, beginning of July, and then going with the guidance from our governor and what's happening in higher ed, it may be likely that we you know, take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but just maintaining the communication, making sure that you're not setting those hard stops to say, this is what it is, and we can't do anything else about it. But also there's a lot of creativity and flexibility with what folks can do with Campus Rec. I'll let Larry talk a little bit about what they've done with the Group X classes since we went remotely, but I think, you know, just staying nimble and being flexible and knowing that everything is being done in the best interest of the institution and the participants, students, faculty, staff, whoever, and, you know, not making that long-term decision until everything has been evaluated in the current state and then moving forward.
Yeah, thank you.
One of the things I would add is we're an independent school. Many of you are state schools, and you have the benefit of a larger risk management at the state level, and you get a lot of guidance from them, a lot of legal guidance. Megan and I are the risk management at Elon, and we have to check with council every now and then, but they're a separate entity. They're not part of the institution. So there are billable hours. A lot of times when you're in independent school, you think, I'm in this alone, but that's why these organizations like URMIA are so important to us. We get to see what our colleagues are doing, and we aren't reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, very good. And thanks for that plug for associations. Um, so Larry, we've got a couple specific questions about summer camps and summer programs. You want to share a little bit about how you've approached that?
Yeah. So I'll use our first year outdoor summer experience first. I think we started from a place of what are we already doing that is going to help mitigate some of these risks, and then we brought in what are the unique restrictions or requirements about COVID, especially in our state, that we're going to have to find a way to do it in a different way. So some of those things would be how we put people in tents, right? As campsites start to open, we might not have the opportunity to have more campsites. So are we bringing larger tents? And we worked with our university physician on how people are going to enter and leave tents, where a mask or face covering is going to be required, how we arrange bags within a tent for folks to sleep. Vans is another one, right? From a travel perspective, are we going to need to take more vehicles? Will we have half of the people in a van, everybody in masks, some combination of those? And I saw a question in there about if we need to get somebody out. Well, that's the thing about our outdoors programs. We already have extraction protocols in place, and this just falls under that. We are going to be able to we're probably going to add an extra staff person per trip. So rather than having 32 of our folks going out and doing a backpacking trip across the mountains for 5 days, we're splitting that into 4 smaller groups, and they each have facilitators with them, but we're adding faculty staff advisors with them as well. And really not from a content expert perspective, but really for in case something like this comes up, that we have extra vehicles, we have extra people, that we can extract somebody from the woods and still be able to provide that same standard of care that we do to the folks that remain on the trip.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Yeah, and Meghan, you alluded to it, so many of these programs, sure, there's the risk, there's the consideration of revenue. Often these summer programs are big revenue generators for campus rec and for universities. But I also think that balance against health and well-being, right? We know that participating in campus rec, of course, provides a lot of outlets for physical activity, but also social connectedness, engagement, often employment. And so how do we balance the need for physical activity, social engagement with, these new risks that this pandemic has provided? I agree with all of you that I think higher education on the whole did an amazing job pivoting to a virtual learning environment and virtual student life environment. Certainly I saw a lot of that out of campus recreation, but the other departments as well. And so has thinking about a virtual university experience, right? Either for a little while or maybe a hybrid version in the fall. How do you think differently about risk in a virtual space? Are there certain,
Yeah, so we are looking at our cyber liability policy a little more closely. You all probably have heard of the Zoom bombs, so I hope I jinx us or anything, but I think the more that we rely on technology to keep our world connected, the more risk there is inherently, not just with hackers, but with people who have, nefarious intent, regardless of what the content is. So I think we've been very lucky. We do have a good policy, but it does go back to how do you deliver, and Larry and I, and Chris and I were talking about this, how do you maintain the culture when you can't be physically present with each other? And this may be a good point for Larry to jump in and talk about how they moved their programs remotely just while we were transitioning from our spring break. We had 2 weeks where students were going offline so that we would have a 3-week break from in-person classes, which then turned into the rest of the semester. But I will give props to the campus rec team and wellness team. They turned a good remote program around quickly. So Larry, if you want to share a little bit about that, that would be great.
Yeah, I think the programming, there's certain things that we're going to be able to move. And like you said, Pam, I think our industry did a fantastic job of pivoting in those situations. We did a lot of what you all did, right? We moved group exercise classes online, we archived them, we created an online wellness resources page. We had different training modules, one in equity, diversity, and inclusion we did with our staff to keep them engaged. We were lucky at Elon that we have a very supportive board of trustees that put in a pandemic leave policy that included both full-time faculty and staff as well as student employees, that if they couldn't come to work, they were paid. So that bought us a little bit of time to think about things. I know other institutions have not been that fortunate, but one of the things that I've talked to my team a lot about is this idea that is we've moved to this virtual programming space. Is what are the individual touch points that we can maintain, right? How can we break things down into those smaller ideas, especially with students that are going to be at risk for retention, right? First year students who are struggling, students who may have not found where they're connecting. So we've done a program with our student involvement office throughout the fall. And along with that came an assessment piece. And if any of you were on the Belonging webinar last week, I talked a little bit about it. But in essence, we're tracking how students find belonging throughout their time in college, specifically in that first year. And we have an issue, like many campuses do, of the over-involved student, that they take on way too much, they burn out, they hit a wall, and often because of that, the under-involved student can fall between the cracks. So we're using some of that data right now to think about how we might have concerted outreach efforts. Now it becomes so much more difficult in a virtual setting, but even if we are in person, we're inviting people, especially new students, into our facilities, and they're having to stand on little X's that are 6 feet apart. When they get to the front desk, they are greeted by somebody on the opposite side of a plexiglass wall, wearing a mask and gloves and saying, "Welcome to our facility." So thinking about how we make sure that we are marrying risk management with welcoming and belonging and inclusion is going to be essential to us, any of us, being able to be successful in the next several months.
And if you look at the going virtual as a strategic risk, you have the danger of students and their parents saying, "Now we're an independent school, our tuition's $50,000 a year. Is the virtual experience worth $50,000? So that goes back to retention. Are we going to be able to retain our students? So it becomes a strategic risk. How much virtual are we willing to take? And you weigh that against people's health. So we have to make that decision.
Yeah, good point. We've got a question here about, Keith from Georgia brings up a good point about using facilities for other events. In his example, because he may not be able to use some of his facilities for some of the traditional recreation things, they may rent it out to other departments on campus, other faculty or staff. Keith, do you want to talk a little bit more about that? And then we'll get some responses from the panelists and from the group.
Sure, I can talk about that. We won't know until about the end of June on our budget cuts here in the state of Georgia, so they're working on that. So there's a possibility that our buildings may not stay open till 11 o'clock or traditional hours. So I have offered through other student affairs departments the opportunity to potentially use our facilities for Greek recruitment, other events going on campus. If we're closing at 9 p.m., we could stay open from 9 to 12, and then or close the building at 9 and rent the facility out from 9 to 12, recover some costs, provide some opportunities for some student organizations. And with 4 large gymnasiums, I have two court gymnasiums, 1 4-court gymnasium, and 1 3-court gymnasium. There's plenty of opportunity to social distance in those areas. So while it's it's a good opportunity for a student activities event fair where they may have 7,000-8,000 people come through there, we could potentially do that at our building. So I think and also our outdoor fields, we can use them as well. If we're not going to be playing flag football, we can use our outfield complex that have about 9 fields that we could use. So I think there's opportunity there to utilize our areas when they're not being used, or if we have to shut them down due to budget cuts.
Yeah, that's a great example, Keith. I've heard that from a couple other campuses as well. You know, not every department on campus has the benefit of space, and campus recreation tends to have the benefit of space, although we always seem to need more. But if you can't use certain spaces right now for their traditional uses, you know, open them up, like Keith said. He had some great examples. I've also heard of collaborations with the counseling department, maybe coming into squash courts and using those as overflow offices, things like that.
I know one of our scenario plans is talking about what if we move the larger classes to these larger spaces. So it may be a case where the institution takes over some of these larger spaces to have larger classrooms with the social distancing. See that at Tulane, they're considering that too.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, many campuses and campus rec departments also serve as Red Cross shelters. And as we head into hurricane season, and we've seen some recent floods, and of course, we're going to be worried about fires on the West Coast. I wonder, is anyone already in conversation with the Red Cross or the other local governmental authorities about how are we going to be an evacuation site if we're still under social distancing and what that looks like? I know that's a big concern in California.
We haven't talked about being an evacuation site, but we have talked about what happens if we have an outbreak of COVID on campus. How are we going to set up isolation areas? You know, do we bring in isolation tents, like the tent hospitals you saw in New York City, or do we convert a gym into one of those hospitals? So we've had some of those conversations already.
That's great. Other questions from the group? It's a lot of great information. Well, I'll ask this question first of Chris and Meghan. As you do your work, and I know Larry's a great partner, but what for all the campus rec professionals in the audience, as risk managers, what's the most helpful thing they can do to manage risk, to partner with you, et cetera?
To open a dialogue with the risk management department, just to bounce things off, ideas off. We're thinking of doing this. What do you think? I like it when they don't drop a problem on our desk, but they bring a possible solution or two, and will you go A or B? And we can have those dialogues. A good example is talking about the vans. You know, we did some brainstorming. How do we use vans during COVID? Do we have multiple vans and spread the number out, or they're going to be together exercising and playing a sport? Does it matter? Do they need to be in one van? So we're working on things like that. Meg?
Yeah, I agree. I think just having open communication and knowing that it really is a partnership. I am not a subject matter expert in campus recreation or facilities or, you know, folks that you all, you know, topics that you all work with every day. So I can give my perspective to a point, but I kind of need your help to fill in the gaps, and then we can meet together and have a conversation of, I understand that your expectation is A, maybe we could meet halfway, you know, but be open to having the conversation and knowing that our job is not here to say no. It's not the hard stop. It's not, you know, we're not trying to prevent anything from happening. It's just making it happen and facilitate it in a way that is beneficial to everyone. So I lean on Evan a lot for his expertise. He leans on me for mine. We come up with a plan together, and hopefully it's successful, but it is the partnership and communication and knowing that, you know, if you do something, we will find out about it. So it's easy to come to us first and have the conversation and figure a way forward. And it instills trust in that department, but then other departments will see, oh, well, this, risk management has worked well with us. If you have this problem, you could help them. And it creates a ripple effect across the university and just makes your program stronger on all fronts. So communication for sure is key.
That's great.
And Brenna asked a question about what if you're in a small school?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great question. I would talk to find out whoever's in charge of insurance and just ask permission to talk to the insurance company. They have a lot of consulting and these vendors do it for free. We have them come on our campus all the time helping us out with different things. And it's a resource that you can tap at no cost.
That's a great suggestion. We also had a question about reopening in terms of staggering teams as they come back. And I also wonder if any of you would comment on, we focus a lot about students and students feeling, safe and comfortable. And but what about staff? How are you approaching whether the faculty and staff are feeling good about coming back to campus and engaging in person again?
We'll let you know next week when they all come back.
Yeah.
I think it is important to point out that staff, student employees are considered staff on our campus. And so since they're the ones who are here, they can gauge what the response is, what their level of comfort is. Again, I think communicating what the university is doing, what the plan is. We have signage posted around campus, reminding people to physical distance, to wear masks, wash your hands. I think, you can't ever really over communicate, but just being honest with people. And if there are concerns or questions or someone doesn't feel comfortable, just be frank and say, these are what the policies and protocols that we're following to make sure that you feel comfortable coming back. And, hopefully the person just maybe is a little anxious or scared or has been working remotely and hasn't seen what all is going on your campus. And so reassuring them that they're not just walking back into the fire, so to speak, but they're, at least on our campus, we have done quite a bit to create an environment of caution and security. And we have protocols and procedures in place for that specific purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, crisis management 101, you cannot over communicate, right? Right. Yes.
As that trickles down to the department level then too, it's about involving people in the process, right? I mean, there are a lot of caring and careful considerations being put into place right now. But as you bring in your teams back onto campus, not making assumptions that how they're going to feel or how they're going to react to a situation, I think is really important. Because again, it's my fear with a lot of this is we start compartmentalizing the COVID pieces of it versus other aspects of isolation, but right, that people feel that, right? They feel a sense of community. So many of us pour all of these hours and time and energy into our jobs, and our work colleagues are like family sometimes. And to be able to understand that they're not going to necessarily feel like just moving them into an isolated spot because they have a shared workstation might not necessarily be exactly the right move for that individual. So as much as you can, involving people in that decision making rather than trying to fix something for them. So operating within guidelines, but certainly involving your folks in what it looks like.
And we did a special communication to all supervisors so they knew how to handle some of these issues and questions that would come up. And we did a general communication to all the employees and talked about some of the things we were doing, the protocols, the cleaning, and the mask, and what we expect rules to be. Social distance if you can, mask if you can't, those type of things.
Yeah, those are all really, really great points. Those are really great points. All right, we have time for maybe 2 more questions. Looks like there's some good chat going on about a survey for what programming people would like to see. So that's great. People are using their resources from their church. We had some questions about what sports earlier. Someone suggested The US Olympic guidelines have been coming out. I know even state high school associations are starting to rank the different types of sports and kind of their opinions about how to mitigate each one of them. Those are good resources. NCAA, of course, although their structures are really different than in the environments we work in, but I think it's a good place to start. Larry, any other resources you're looking at when it comes to sport, Olympics, NCAA?
Those
Those are the ones.
we're looking
Okay.
at. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Stephanie, can you pop in and talk about how you're staggering your employees coming back? I think that's an interesting model.
Well, we haven't quite finalized it yet. At California Baptist University, actually, this really comes off of Greta's comment having to postpone opening because someone on her team came in contact, and so the whole team had to quarantine. So what we've been kind of tossing about is like there's a group that's a Monday, Wednesday group and a Tuesday, Thursday, and then we alternate Fridays so that in case one half is unable to come in because they have to self-quarantine, we have the other half they can come in and run. The concern is everyone having to be out, and as it's been brought up with like supply chain concerns, is to get going and have momentum and then have to stop because we don't have supplies, we don't have people, all of the above. So that's kind of our plan for right now. Being that people can work from home, we're hoping that we can kind of find a balance in that.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really smart. The example Stephanie's referring to is the university, it's the Northern Iowa Community College was all set to open one of the earlier weeks in May. And as a community college, they're a little bit smaller program, smaller staff size. And then someone on their staff got exposed. And so they had to delay opening by a week. So Stephanie, I think that's great. It got you thinking about staggered so that, you know, if one person goes down, the whole team doesn't go down. Certainly if you have a staff size to manage that. Oh, good. In the chat, we have a resource from the Aspen Institute. They also do really great work.
I think that's a great idea to be able to stagger your staff if that's allowed. One of the things we're really emphasizing, if you're sick or think you might be sick, stay home. Don't power through it, stay home.
It'll be interesting to see the lasting impacts on work culture and the culture of work on all of this. There was an interesting article a couple weeks ago authored by Melinda Gates about how COVID-19 has exposed or brought to the limelight all the caregiving that goes on, and not just parents, you know, caring for children, but people have a lot of caregiving roles in their lives, and you know, by and large, that hasn't been well managed or well respected in the workplace. And so, will this be an opportunity for all of us? You know, our organizations ask us to bring our whole selves to work, but I think in a reciprocal basis, that also means there has to be some allowances for the fact that we have full, rich lives with lots of roles and responsibilities.
That might be a cultural challenge at some institutions as well. I know at Elon, you know, we don't take vacations, we don't take sick days, power through, because there's always work that needs to be done, and if you do it, then who's going to do it? But I think culturally, you know, this is going to be a big shift, and people will acknowledge that the time off is needed to recover, and you know, not that people expect you to come in, but it'll be interesting to see how in a couple months that'll work. If, you know, someone's out for 14 days, who picks up, who, you know, is that something that someone can do remotely, or do we just, you know, kind of put the pieces together and carry along as we can until the individual is back? I don't know. Be interesting.
Yeah.
Just a quick point to that. One of the things that has been a concern for us, and now is a legitimate concern, is being able to do people's jobs if they're out for an extended period of time. And so we created desk manuals that literally, if I'm on a 8-week vacation to Tahiti, which, you know, might happen someday, someone can come in and follow that desk manual and literally do my job. It took our team a little bit to feel comfortable creating a manual that they feel like, you know, is handing over their job. But it's been really useful when people have had to take leave for different reasons. And will definitely be something that, I mean, it is something we're updating now, but something that we'll use when people are out if they have to be.
Mhm. Yeah, Stephanie, I also heard an example of another institution lending staff across campus. And in the example she was sharing was more about the professional development opportunity for that staff person who'd come up through recreation. I think they were probably 10, 12 years in recreation, and then had an opportunity to go work in housing on a temporary basis. And she was excited for how that would expand their thinking, their perspective, their skill sets. And they're coming back to rec. It wasn't that they lost their job or anything. So there might be some interesting professional development opportunities in all of this.
There was a comment about how do you know people aren't taking advantage of, oh, I feel a fever coming on. We have a policy, if you're still out after 3 days, you have to have a doctor's note. You have to be working with a physician. Either you're being tested and they're recommending quarantine or something to that effect.
Mm-hmm. That's smart. Okay, we probably have time for one more question if anyone wants to pop in here. I will say, I think there's a lot to learn. We probably have a mix of schools on here, but there's a lot to learn from smaller programs. Often we look to the larger schools and all their resources and their ability to really fully develop some things. But I think in these times, there's a lot to learn from small schools that have had to run efficiently all the time, that have had to get by with less. And so I think some of our medium and larger schools that, are going to hit some enrollment declines, are going to hit some staffing, permanent staffing changes. I would encourage you to look to the small and medium-sized schools to see what their best practices are, how they get the job done. There's a lot of creativity and innovation that goes on in those spaces. Because frankly, sometimes they have less bureaucracy that gets in their way. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to Jenny and our URMIA colleagues. Thank you to Larry and Chris and Megan at Elon, who shared so much good information today and responded to your questions. I really, really appreciate this. It's nice to see these two groups come together and share their thoughts and concerns and some of their ideas about how to manage through all of this in the best way for our students and for our staff and campus communities. I've always heard, and I think Jenny would echo the same thing because we've talked about it, that on the whole, campus recreation and risk managers on campus enjoy a really positive collaborative relationship. And so I think all of you are seeing the opportunity to build on that relationship and do the best for your campus communities as we all manage through this pandemic. So thank you for your time and attention today. The recording should be up on the NIRSA website no later than tomorrow morning, probably later this afternoon. We are on the West Coast here, so we still have a bit of an afternoon left. And I'll get those links to Jenny and she can communicate them out in the URMIA channels as well. So thank you. Thank you again, Larry, Chris, and Megan. And I hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.